everyone and welcome back to my booktube channel, Lisa in Bookland. Today I'm here to bring you one of my rare individual book reviews for this book, The Real Charlotte by Edith Somerville and Martin Ross. Despite the second name, these are both women, Anglo-Irish women who wrote books together at the start of the 20th century. Their best known book is probably the book Some Experiences of an Irish RM, and this apparently was their favourite book, and I have to say I enjoyed this a lot more than Some Experiences of an Irish RM, which is why I decided to do an individual book review of it. So it was first published in 1894, so it's an Irish Victorian classic. Funny, like, some books you enjoy them well, but then when I went to write my review, just, you know, my own review that I always do in my book journal, I had a lot to say about it, so yeah, I decided I might capture them on camera in case anybody was interested or considered reading this book. This book is like set in the 1890s, so like contemporary to the time that it was published. So a tiny bit of the background, I suppose, to the society that it was in. Ireland is still part of Great Britain as it was until like 1921. The landed gentry were still a big thing. Historically, I suppose, have had like strong links to Britain, so that we kind of known as like the Anglo-Irish or like the Protestant ascendancy. Although at this time there were like Catholic big farmers and things were coming to power, but the 1890s in Ireland there was no kind of rebellion or anything. That was kind of a little bit later. This book is set, I suppose, against the background of like the end of that era. There's two main characters in this book, two women. There's Francie Fitzpatrick, who's like a young woman, probably 17 or something. She's born and brought up in Dublin in like a lower middle class family. In the first chapter of the book she is going to Sunday school, and when they get out she just runs wild and ends up stealing like a bread cart and running away with it, and getting up to all sorts of trouble. And she's very much of a ragamuffin, and for various reasons she gets sent to stay with her cousin Charlotte, who Charlotte is an older woman who she's unmarried. She doesn't really want to have Francie to stay with her, but she kind of has to. Well, she kind of tolerates Francie but does try to integrate her into the society down the country. Charlotte is definitely the highlight of this book. Like, Francie was nice but Charlotte completely overshadowed her. So Charlotte, as I said, she's a middle-aged woman. She's very independent. I think she's like the original mad cat lady. She has got so many cats that she adores and knows all of their names and knows them all personally. And at the start of the book she wants Christopher Dysart, son of the local gentry, to photograph her cats for her. So yeah, how wonderful. She's an interesting position in that her father was actually the agent for Dysarts. Because she has a little bit of money, she's managed to kind of drag herself into a more equal footing with them, and she's really intelligent and everybody around her knows it. I really found her character interesting, and you know, she does seem pretty contented. She is maybe a little bit bitter at times. So I read the introduction after I finished the book, and I was kind of surprised that the introduction really vilified Charlotte. You know, she does do some things that aren't very nice, but I can understand why she does everything, and other people don't really treat her very nicely at some parts of the book either, so I can see why she did it. But I really enjoyed how powerful she was within the community, but also that a lot of the time she's like characterised nearly as a man. At one part she's at a party and it says that she went over like drinking with the other men, and she seems to talk to the men a lot more than she talks to the women. And the like young Dysart, Christopher, like openly says to her that if she was the agent that she would look after things better than they're being looked after at the moment. And also a highlight for her was just like the last chapter. I just love the way she approached things in the last chapter. It's so typical of her character, and yeah, it's just really just like do it yourself. For all of her rise socially, I suppose she's still not afraid to get like down and dirty and do what's needed. So yeah, she was a great character. Francie then, who is again Charlotte's cousin, not her niece. Charlotte hates when it's thought to be her niece. So Francie, I suppose, is a little bit more innocent. She is a lot younger. She definitely is quite overshadowed by Charlotte, but the plot really, I suppose, does revolve around Francie, principally around her romantic interests, of which she has several of different types. I don't want to give any spoilers here, and some that are way more likeable than others, and sometimes you get very frustrated as her decisions, as you would. I really enjoyed her trying to like fit in. So when I suppose she moves down to go to stay with Charlotte, like Charlotte is living in a higher class than she'd been used to in Dublin. So it's interesting to watch her adapt to that, and like when she goes to a party or a dinner, she's unsure how to behave. She's like, oh, do I give my umbrella to the butler? Do I keep it? And then all of that, trying to work out how to do. I can almost imagine myself if I was invited into those circles to being in the same situation. But yeah, you really were rooting for Fancy and living it with her, I suppose. At one stage, she actually does go back to Dublin, and realises how good a life she has with Charlotte. And it reminded me so much of Mansfield Park when Fanny goes back to Portsmouth and is kind of shocked at the conditions she used to live in. So there's a bit of a parallel there, so that was interesting. But it's not only Charlotte and Fancy, like her love interests are so well characterised as well, and like every character in this book is so vivid. But yeah, the love interests, as despicable as some of them are, you still know them really well and understand all their motivations, even if they are quite ghastly. And also there's obviously characters of like a lower class in this book, like the servants who are troublesome. There's one sickly old woman that's living on her own in a house and taking up the house and the farm, I suppose, when there's the feeling is that the land could be much better used. And the way that they're trying to push her out. So there's loads of different like small storylines like that, and it just captured, I think, Ireland of this time really, really well. Even like, as I said, there was no kind of background of tension about like independence or anything or like that out there, or even I can't even remember a mention of home rule in this, which would have been way more topical at the time. But there were like small hints about religious differences. Charlotte's servant, she's hired because she's supposed to be a Protestant girl that we were reliable, and then she spotted going off to the Catholic Church, and Charlotte is not impressed. So yeah, just those small little things. I was a bit worried, having read some experiences with Irish RM, that there would be a lot about horses in this, but happily there is very much less about horses, and the bit that is about horses is very funny. Like, definitely these are such funny authors. Like, I mean, the humour in some experiences in Irish RM was maybe a bit more like slapstick, but this is way more like natural humour and humour to my taste. So yeah, would really recommend it for that reason only alone. So the last point I wanted to touch on then was kind of, I suppose this is a society novel, but as opposed to usual Victorian novels I'd have read before, it's set in Ireland and not in England, and there are differences there. And like, as a complete non-expert in like Victorian society, it's interesting to like spot the differences between society in Ireland and England. Definitely the perception from this book, and I think it's true given everything else I've read as well, is like the differences between the classes were like smaller than they were in England. Even outside of that, I suppose, it's definitely true that like the Irish gentry then when they went over to England were like, most of them I'd say were kind of regarded as lower than the English gentry. But anyways, it is quite fascinating. At one point, I can't remember what character, but he's looking at the relation between the Dyserts and Charlotte, who was the agent's daughter, like their agent's daughter, and they're almost equals, and they remark to themselves that it's kind of a marker of the social poverty of the land, that there was so few people of status around in rural Ireland that the people that had any status at all, I suppose, would club together. And also like the current agent also is like invited to all their parties and things that mightn't have happened in England of the same period. In fact, it's mentioned at the very start of the novel at the Sunday school. This girl from a really wealthy family is sitting between like the baker's daughter and the butcher's daughter or something. They're at the same school, there's no class distinction. It is also quite funny, coming back to the Dublin scenes, I suppose, that some things never change. Like, there's a description of like a Sunday afternoon in the north side, how little there is to do with all the entertainments are in the south side and things. And that north versus south thing today is definitely there, like hopefully more as a joke nowadays. So yeah, that was probably a slightly rambling review. I wanted to give a little bit more detail, I suppose, than I could in a wrap up, especially with the number of books I have to cover in December. So yeah, would really recommend The Real Charlotte if you do get to it, if you're interested in literature of this period. I don't think it's very easy to find a paper copy of. I was actually really lucky to find this. I just called into a second-hand bookshop, a small one, and I saw this on the shelf, so it was meant to be. So yeah, very much enjoyed it. And yes, if you've read this book, please let me know. I'd love to know what you thought of it. And yeah, thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Thursday for my next video.